So let me just mention, all of you probably know, but if you don't know, they're forming a competition team. Our college is going to compete against other colleges in some of these contests. And so I don't know any of the details. Email Liz, Elizabeth Biddlecombe, and presumably within a week or so, she'll organize the team and such and let you know. So let's see, Apple asked people to upgrade their OS. Yeah, that's right. Yes, well, Apple never has detailed disclosure on bugs. They've had a policy against describing security problems forever. And so they're not any legal obligation to do so. But it does, when your company gets breached, sometimes there are legal obligations and sometimes it's not so clear. Anyway.
Does anyone following like in the Microsoft when they do a bug release correction, the people following the bug release and then sort of to do exploits out of it? To anybody?
Oh, you mean where people attack you because of the patch?
Yeah.
Yeah, reverse engineering. That's very common. Yeah.
No, does Apple, anybody attack Apple like that?
Yes. As a matter of fact, that's what AxiomX did. That's how he found the new jailbreak.
Apple don't detail the.
They don't. So you have to do it just by reverse engineering the update. But you can take the update and you can look and see what changed. And that's what people do. And that makes it a lot easier. And then, of course, you can find a bug and attach people that didn't put on the bug. It works for Apple and it works for Windows. Should work for anything. Anyway, by the way, also on my homepage, if you haven't seen it, there's a Project V1 training videos. I highly recommend these. I've been learning a lot from them. And let me know if you know they're sources of good videos, but if you watch these and write like a paragraph summary of them, you can get extra credit. It applies to any of my courses. And I've been watching the ZeefCon ones. Are very good. They're all good. They're all here because I found good videos on there. So I highly recommend looking at some training videos. Anyway, so today we're down to Chapter 3, which is Cryptographic Security. Of course, this is something to get into us first so you understand how to rate the quality of cryptography. It turns out to be a whole lot less pure and clean and beautiful than it ought to be. So we're going to try to quantify security and define when something is impossible, and then talk about how to make sufficient security. So the first thing is something impossible. Informational security is what you normally person would want, which means it's absolutely impossible for anybody to decrypt this without the key. Even if you have forever and the most powerful computer in the world, you'll never get there. That would be nice. But we almost never have that, so we settle for computational security, which means given what we know about the computers that are available now, it's not practical for anybody to do it given any use with any known hardware that we have at the moment. So that's informational security. The only one that's informationally secure is the one-time pad we talked about. The one-time pad where all the keys are random and never reused. If you try every possible key, you will generate every possible plaintext, and one of them is right, but there's no way to tell which one's right. So no amount of computer time or humans working on it or anything will ever get in if you don't have the key. That's the only one that I've ever heard of that is actually informationally secure. It's just got a huge key distribution problem, so it's very rarely used. In practice, this is what everything we use actually has, is that it's just that it can't be done right now. So AES 128, the most common private key encryption scheme used always, has a key 128 bits long. And so nobody can do 2 to the 128 calculations of anything because 2 to the 128 is a really big number. There are not enough time in the universe for 2 to the 128 clock cycles, and there are not enough computers to have 2 to the 128 computers working in parallel or anywhere even close. So that's why this became the standard. A 128-bit key ought to be perfectly secure forever. But quantum computers can do it with only 2 to the 64 operations. So quantum computers are, in principle, if they get much, much better than they are now, right now they can't do this at all, but in 20 or 30 years, you can only see part of the slides. Oh, let me take a look here and see if I can figure it out. Oh, I see what you mean. Good, thanks for telling me. Let me see if I can fix that. There's always something. I see it here. Maybe I can, I remember, it's somehow not the right shape. All right, the only way I know to fix it is to narrow this down. There, okay, good. Thank you for telling me. Good. All right, that should be better now. Thanks for telling me. All right, so anyway, if quantum computers get much better, then AES 128 will no longer be secure, and we'll have to use AES 256, which already exists. But right now, there is no hardware that anybody knows of that could crack AES 128 without knowing the key. So you can quantify security. You take the number of calculations the attacker will perform and their probability of success, and then you can rate it. So AES 128 is T over 2 to the 128. So if you try one key, you have only one chance in 2 to the 128 of making it, of finding the right key. If you can try 2 to the 128 keys, you'd have a 100% chance of finding a key, and that's how you can rate it. So in practice, you probably can't do anything more than 2 to the 64. 64 is the largest key that has ever been broken by brute force. There is a project underway to crack a 72-bit key by brute force, and it is expected to take another 1,000 years. So 2 to the 64 is about the number of calculations you can ever really do on anything. And that would still only have one chance in 2 to the 64 of getting in, which is a ridiculously small number. So that's all fine as long as there's no mathematical shortcut. And there doesn't seem to be one in AES, but that is not something you can prove perfectly. So we can quantify security. We can determine in bits. So if we say, if you have n bits of security, that means it'll take 2 to the n operations to crack. So 128 bits of security is enough that we feel pretty confident that nobody will ever crack it. So that's one way to measure it. You should have at least 100 bits or 128 bits if you want to be reasonably secure. So WEP, for example, was the early encryption for wireless networks, wired equivalent privacy, and it had two versions, one with a 40-bit key and one with a 104-bit key. The stronger version had a 104-bit key. Now that should be secure. 2 to the 104 calculations to crack, which is fine. Anything over 100 is essentially unobtainable. Like I say, even 72 is unobtainable. But the problem is there were mathematical flaws in the operation, so you could exclude key space. So you didn't really have to try all those keys. So in 2001, they found an attack that brought it down to 2 to the 20 instead of 2 to the 104, and then later on they got it down to 2 to the 15, so it was ridiculously easy to crack, and you could do it in like 5 minutes on an ordinary single home computer. So that's the problem with WEP. It's not that the key was too short, it's that the algorithm had defects. So you could exclude certain possibilities for the key.
Cell phones still using WEP, right?
Who?
Cell phone.
No, I don't think cell phones ever did. It's only older wireless hardware. Almost nothing uses WEP anymore.
WAP.
What's that?
WAP.
WAP?
Isn't it?
WAP is totally different. WAP is just a way of advertising wireless services. Yeah, WEP is pretty much extinct now. All right, but now let's try another one, substitution cipher. So you have an alphabet, and each letter you replace with another letter. So there's 26 choices for the first letter, and 25 for the next letter, and 24 for the next letter. So that turns out to be 2 to the 88. That means this has a long enough key, it would be effectively uncrackable. And yet, you can pretty easily crack it. So I thought I might try this one for people. I did this as a kid, and I made one of these in case people haven't seen them like I did as a child. And I thought we'd try this and see. So there's a cryptograph to crack. And this, in principle, the key space is 2 to the 88. Each letter is replaced by another letter. But in fact, children crack it easily with no problem. Does anybody see a weakness here? I'll take suggestions.
Well, the weakness is it's got spaces in there.
Yes. In fact, the fact that you have punctuation marks
Yeah.
and spaces, so we should be able to crack it in just a couple of minutes. Does anybody see a good thing to, well, you can do it with frequency analysis, but in fact that won't be very successful here because it's so short.
Is this in English?
It is English, yeah.
Well, 4 letters,
Yep.
C public A.
Yeah, I'm open for suggestions. We should be able to crack this within 5 minutes, probably even less. C is either A or I. Now, how do you determine that? Because right here, you have one letter. That's got to be the I or A, so that's true. Now, can you see any evidence to choose whether it's A or I?
well, it's an I because of the apostrophe.
Right. This is
I,
something like I've or I'll or something. So C must be I.
yeah,
Okay.
I.
This is what you
So
do.
that would be-
So that's I. Okay. Now what else? The C. Yep, that's right. So C is I. Now what else can you do?
Probably PT probably ED or something. I have.
What's that?
PT probably DE I have.
Which part of it?
PD.
TD, this part here, right. Well, it can't be LL because it would be doable. Every letter is only changed to,
VE.
it probably what?
VE.
VE, right. So let's try VE, I've. Okay, let's try that. So P is V. Let's see if there are any more P's. There are. And if D is E, that's a very valuable letter because E is the most popular letter of all. So we should be able to narrow it down pretty fast. And after we fill these in, E, is it P that's V? It is, good. And D is E.
A couple of P's at the end.
Yep. And you may have done this as a child, but if you haven't, you should see it. Okay, so now we got I've. Okay, did you see anything else we can get here?
How about Q is
I can barely see the bottom of your text. Oh, thank you. I have to make this higher for the people online.
Q is H.
Q,
First one.
that's,
Hello?
you think that's H?
Yeah, how about hello?
No, it can't be hello because there's only 4 letters. All right. See if you spot any other weak spots. Someone thinks this one is believe. How did you determine that, Sasha? First word could be help. It could be. Sasha, you determine D equals E. That's right. But how do you determine that word is believe? It's an interesting guess. But I wouldn't assume. No, it can't be believe because that would end in E, and this does not end in E. I think this here might be something. I think that after the apostrophe, it has to be a T, the most common thing. So I think Z is a T. No, it could be S, it could be T. Let's see if we can find anything about a Z anywhere.
I've got. I like, yeah, after I've,
Yeah,
no further down. No. Well, yes, I've got.
Yeah. Okay,
I kind of like that. I've got.
okay, but
Some,
if you make this got,
I've got some.
yeah, you looked it up?
No.
Okay,
no,
good.
I'm just guessing.
Okay, if you just got, okay, those are D's there, like that, okay. If we make that got, that's probably enough to do the whole thing. So Z is T. You've already got that. L is O.
I think that's some.
Yep, I think you're right. Okay, and now you should be able to pretty much get the whole thing. Let's see, L is O. And let's see, A is G.
Good.
That's probably good, yes.
G.
Yep, that's probably good. Pretty much has to be.
That's the only B up there.
Someone-
Good evening. No.
It can't be evening, so let's see, L is, did we get all the L's? We did. How about J is M? Are there any more J's? No. Yeah, there's J. All right, I think you can guess the end of this word.
Man.
Yep, that should have to be men there to make men. And someone says I'm missing a P in the third word. Yeah, P is V. All right, and so now I know what K is N. There must be more of them. Yep.
I don't.
I don't.
D-O.
If it was don't, we would know. It can't be don't.
Sorry.
Yep. What else could it be besides don't?
Can't.
Can't. It probably has to be can't, right?
Can't.
So now we have C and A. F is C. And A, there must be more A's. W is A. All right. And there's one.
K
All right.
is N. K is
Wait, T is S. There's an S here. All right, X,
K is N.
K is
N.
K is N. Okay, is there a K? Where's
Yeah,
K?
right after that, right after you, before you.
Oh, yeah, okay, good. All right, so now
Good heavens.
this must be an H, B must be H. Okay. And
I can't believe.
I think it's got to be believe, hasn't it? B-E-L-I.
I can't believe
Yep. So,
how. No, I can't believe.
it's got to be U and Y we haven't found yet. U is Y, somebody says, and I think he's right.
I can't
Yeah,
believe
I think
you.
that's right. Can't believe you men. I'm hitting funny buttons by accident. All right. All right. And I think that's pretty close. And so now I think you don't have enough information for these, but you can. It's going to be well.
Oh, yeah.
And from the cartoon, you can see what it is rope. So anyway, this is all I wanted to make was the point that this is a child's play to break this kind of cipher, even though logically it shouldn't be. In principle, that was 2 to the 88 keys, but in fact, there were tricks. You could just guess the short words, notice the punctuation, and that's what it was with WEP. There were tricks that would get it to you. All right, let me see if I can get my Twitch visible to me. All right, good. So anyway, get to my thing here. All right. All right. So anyway, there's that one, and I made another one that's even harder. You can play with if you like, but I don't think I'll do it live because that took longer than I thought it would. Anyway, so RSA is 2,048 bits long. This is something that bothered me for a long time. Public keys are so long. Why does it have to be so long? But that only provides 112 bits of security. That's because the key is not a random number. It's the product of 2 primes. And the mathematics is a little bit more complicated. So you actually need 2,048 bits for RSA to achieve around 100 bits of security. And so I discussed this online with your textbook authors, in fact, available on Twitter, which is nice. And he explains, there's no simple answer here. These measurements are kind of rough. So here's the U.S. government standard, National Institute of Standards, what they recommend. So 1024 is less than 80, 2048 is 112, 3072 is 128. That's why they recommend we should all be moving beyond 2048. And you see, these are acceptable through 2030, but 2031 and beyond, we should move above 2048. That's the current recommendation for RSA. So you can talk about how much it will cost to do a real attack. Parallel computing helps, using memory instead of time helps, pre-computation helps, and the number of targets helps. So if you have 2 to the 56 sequential steps, that's much slower than 2 to the 56 independent steps because you can't use parallel computing. If they're sequential, if you must do step 1 before you do step 2, then you really have to wait 2 to the 56 units of time. But if you just have 2 to the 56 independent operations, you can use a parallel processor like a GPU and do a bunch of them all at once. And so you can save time by using more processors. So there are also algorithms that are memory hard. Bitcoin, for example, just uses SHA-256 of SHA-256, which takes almost no memory and just computing time, and that is a problem with Bitcoin. The original point of Bitcoin was you'd have processors all over the world, and they'd be distributed so people couldn't conspire to cheat. But it turned out that since the only thing that matters is CPU speed, that means the only thing that matters is electricity. And so they all converged until recently in China, where they could get the cheapest electricity. Then China kicked them out. Now they pretty much all converged in Texas for the same reason. But they keep moving to the part of the world where you can get cheap electricity, and they all are there. Yeah.
They went to Kazakhstan, not in Texas.
Yeah, there's some in Kazakhstan too. There's a lot in Texas too. That's where a lot of them went. Anyway, the point is, it was not a good decision to make a computation that required only CPU. Then they decided it would be better in Ethereum to make it memory hard. They made a computation that uses a lot of RAM, the idea being more people can afford that, and it won't be tied so closely to electric power. Anyway, that's Ethereum is memory hard. And there was another one called Chia, which was actually using a lot of disk space instead of using a lot of RAM or a lot of memory, just to make it difficult for the mining, although that one didn't seem to catch on too much. And by the way, this Ethereum mining is, of course, ending next week. They're moving to Ethereum 2 and ending all mining, presumably. So This is a historical artifact. Supposedly, by the end of this month, Ethereum will no longer have any mining and no longer rely on proof of work at all. It'll rely on proof of stake, more like a normal bank, and therefore be better for the environment, but probably less secure. Anyway.
What do you mean memory hard?
Memory hard means you need a lot of memory. It has a calculation where you have to have gigabytes of memory, and therefore you can't just make an ASIC, and you have to actually pay for a lot of memory hardware to do it, and that instead of just having a lot of power and a fast computing. And the idea was that would make it more achievable for everybody.
Memory is very cheap, right?
Yeah, it is. That's the idea. But, all right, so you can also do pre-computation. This is what rainbow table attacks are. Instead of doing a calculation to try to decrypt something with the key and then decrypt with the next key, you could find some of the calculations that are repetitive and make a table to just look them up. So instead of doing repetitive calculations over and over, you just look them up. And that works for crack certain things like, for example, Windows password hashes. Windows XP password hashes use this system called LM hash. And now they all use NT hashes. You have the LM hashes were an old system, and you could in fact have a pre-computed table that did most of the calculation by just looking it up, and that would fit in just a gigabyte or less of memory. So you could crack the old hashes very fast. And you can, so here's my Windows password hashes also have this curious effect. There is no salt. So if you look at this, there are hashes that are exactly the same. Those are empty. Maybe I don't have an example here, but if two people have the same password, they have exactly the same hash because it's a very simple calculation. And so you can crack things, password hashes online. You can often crack them just by Googling them. You can find online crackers, and there are other ones you can run. Because there is no randomness, there's no salt, people just have archived tables of Windows password hashes and the plain text passwords since 1993 when they came out with the current system. Anyway, so the older system you could break with the rainbow table attack. The new one you can break just by using the internet as a large table of solved hashes. And that's a problem. So if you have, now, another thing is number of targets. Suppose you want to get into a company and you steal all the password hashes and they have 1,000 employees. Well, now you have 1,000 guesses. So you don't have to crack them all. You just want to crack any one. So again, you might be able to match one of them in 1/1000th of the time. This is essentially how credential stuffing attacks work. They will even take a password that's obvious, like PASSWORD, and just try it against every account. And somebody will use that password, then you're in. So usually in practice, there's only two kinds of choices. 128 is the typical security for normal use, and for high security, you double it to 256. Those are the main choices that people use in practice. And that's like the military is supposed to use AES 256, and everybody else uses AES 128. And that seems to work pretty well in practice. So let me see if I can fit this on my screen. There, that should work, and now I can do the cahoots. My problem with the resolution of that screen has created a problem with fitting things on the screen, but there's always something. Okay. So it's libraries, favorites, 141, 3A. That should do it. Abdul making all the emojis. I don't know who it is. Somebody's really got pretty good at the Unicode. What's that?
Somebody's hungry, there's a crab, there's a squid.
Was that food? I couldn't. No, it's a face, and I don't think it's random stuff. Anyway, it may spell something out. Anyway, I guess we got enough people. Let's give it a shot. All right, so how secure is AES 128? Yep, computationally secure. In practice, nobody can get in without the key as far as we know. All right. All right, what kind of security does not change as the technology improves? Informationally secure is secure in principle, regardless of your hardware. All right, so how many bits of security does RSA 128 provide? Wait a minute. All right, RSA 128 is appalling, very weak. I'm not liking this question.
It should be less than 120.
I think, yeah, it should be like less than 64. I think there's a mistake in this question. I can't do anything about it. It probably should be AES 128. Yeah, I think that must be what I was looking for. When RSA came out, they had short keys for the computer. Anyway, but this would be much less. It'd be like 16 bits of security or something. It would be appalling. Nobody ever used that. So I don't like this question. I can't ungrade it though. So that's why this is extra credit, because it's kind of unfair. On we go. All right. All right, how long should an RSA key be now, according to the government? That's better. Yeah, 2048 is the current recommendation. Good? All right, what cost is large to make Ethereum mining more secure? Until next week. It's supposedly memory hard. All right. So, all right. So, according to those winners, and those all look like I can tell who those people are, so that's good. All right, so let's go back to here, and it's 6:30, so we're on time. All right, so if you want to convince people that your stuff is secure, then a mathematical proof would be nice. The alternative is heuristic security, and certainly we've used both. For example, the attempt to make quantum-proof cryptography. They announce it. Mathematicians submit candidates, they publish the candidates, mathematicians attack it, and after enough years of them not being able to break it, people trust it. That's the idea. So you do both of these things. So if you could really prove something, you typically can't prove it's hard because that's not well defined, but you can prove it is as hard as something else, which you think is hard. That's what you get. So RSA requires factoring a number into its component primes to break into it, and that's a famously hard problem. Studied for thousands of years, nobody has ever proven that it's impossible, but nobody's ever found a fast way to do it. So for what it's worth, You can try it. So here's how RSA works. You choose two random large prime numbers, P and Q, and you multiply them to get n, and then you choose an exponent e, which is usually just this number, doesn't have to be random or anything, and then that's your public key, the product of those numbers and this exponent. And anybody can encrypt data with that and send it to you, but you can only decrypt it by knowing P and Q. So you can now receive secrets by doing this. You cannot send secrets, you can only receive them. The person at the other end would have to make their own key pair in order to receive them for two-way communication. But that's the miracle of RSA, and it is strong as long as nobody can deduce P and Q from N. All right, so to encrypt a message, you take your message, turn it into a number, raise it to the E mod N, and that turns it into a different large number. And to decrypt it, you take that and take it to the D mod N, like we talked about in the modular arithmetic we did last time. This is the encryption key, and this is the decryption key. And you can only find the decryption key if you know P and Q. That's why it's your private key. Only you can decrypt things, nobody else can decrypt them, as long as factoring numbers remains a hard problem. So now you can compare one scheme to another. You can prove mathematically that one scheme is as good as another one, and therefore you can get some evidence that they're strong. So you can develop things like hash functions and symmetric algorithms and so on, and prove that they are as secure as something else that's trusted, but that's not as good as proving it's perfectly secure because there is no such thing. So the underlying system could be broken. For example, somebody could figure out how to factor numbers into their component primes, and then RSA will break, and everything that was proven as good as RSA will also break. So that's a problem. And you also might your proof might contain mistakes. This happens quite a lot too. Various things can go wrong. So RSA is easy to crack. In practice, RSA, in fact, has a lot of flaws. One thing that happened is P and Q aren't random enough. This happened in the real world a lot. Something like 4 out of every 1,000 public keys had duplicate keys because there weren't enough random bits in the random calculation. There was one called knapsack that was broken by something called lattice reduction, a different way of attacking it. And often there are side channel attacks. Your actual hardware does something that leaks out the key, like the radio waves or the power consumption or the timing. Or another thing that's been done is errors caused by cosmic rays causing bits to flip, give out information about the key. So those are things that are not in the math. And there's another thing you can do is you can just use it incorrectly, as I've mentioned in this class in 128. Most of the apps I've studied just use the wrong kind of encryption for their job, so that even though the math is fine, the actual way it's used doesn't achieve the goal. All right, and then there's heuristic security. You don't really have a mathematical proof that it meets any defined level of security. You just say a lot of people have tried and they've all failed, so I guess it's okay. Not very reassuring, but they have this. So what they often do is they simplify the cipher. Like AES has 10 rounds of computations. You could lower that to like 2 rounds and crack it, and 3 rounds and crack it, and say, okay, we can only crack it for a certain number of rounds. Then you add a bunch more rounds, and you say, there, it appears to be more secure than the strongest version we can crack. This is true. Most ciphers have weaker versions that you can attack. And then you can define the security margin of how much more encryption we added on top of the highest amount that we know how to crack. That's something. So AES is the main block cipher. It has 128, 192, and 256 key sizes. And it has different rounds, 10, 12, and 14, various rounds. And so AES 128, there's no attack that's faster than 2 to the 128. But AES and 192 and 256, in fact, are breakable in 2 to the 176 and 2 to the 119 time. So theoretically, AES 256 is in fact less secure than AES 128. So that's the thing. These are very non-practical attacks. None of these are possible. They're theoretical only, but that's an issue. And of course, this attack only breaks 11 rounds of AES 256, and the full AES 256 has 14 rounds.
By rounds, do you mean the number of passes in the cipher?
Yes, and we'll go through that in considerable detail. All AES does is it does an XOR with something, then it moves the bytes a certain pattern, then it moves them another pattern. It just does 4 mathematical steps, and then you do that over and over again.
Is that the block cipher?
Yes, it's like shuffling cards. You put it through a shuffle, and you shuffle it again and again and again. And each round scrambles it more. And they were only able to attack the 11 round AES 256, but the full AES 256 has 14 rounds. So it has not been cracked to this extent. But that's not a very big security margin, just 3 more rounds.
The book is actually really good in pointing out that 2 to the 88 nanoseconds is more than the time of the universe.
Yes, 2 to the 88 is plenty.
Yeah.
Yep, anything around 100 bits, if there's no shortcut, 100 bits of security would be enough. But like we just showed, there's often shortcuts like that, cryptography, that cartoon we did. So anyway, then you have to generate a key. Right? I often casually say, choose a random number. Well, as we found out, that's not so simple. That's an issue. Another thing people do a lot is from password. You choose a password and you use a key derivation function to generate a key from it. We'll do that quite a bit. Another thing you can do is have a key agreement protocol where you have a key and you transmit it to someone else across the internet, an untrusted channel. You find a subtle way to do that without exposing the key. And that's at the heart of public key cryptography. So to make a symmetric key, it's just a simple random number. So for 128-bit security, you need a 16-byte number. You can do that with OpenSSL. It's one of many random number generators. Then you get 128 bits of randomness, here expressed in hexadecimal. An asymmetric key is much, much slower. This is a huge problem. For RSA, first you have to find a prime number. It may take 100 guesses to find a prime number. You just guess random numbers and you check to see if they're prime. Then you have to do that again for Q, then you multiply them together. So it is amazingly slow. I should be able to do this stuff live. Let me see if I can do it here or not. I think I have OpenSSL. Let's make a symmetric key first, which is this one, OpenSSL rand. Let me try it. Move this up here so I can see what I'm doing. All right, do I have OpenSSL? I think I do. I do, good. Okay, how about quit? Okay, OpenSSL rand in hex, length 16. Okay, it's instant, of course. It doesn't take much time at all to make a random number. But if I try to make the RSA key, that's going to take a while. So let's have Python 3, and now from crypto, see if I can do this. Import RSA. And yeah, I might have a problem here. From crypto public key, good. Okay, good. There are various crypto algorithms, crypto libraries. Good, so now I can generate it. Key equals RSA.generate 2048. All right. Okay, it took about 2 seconds to do that. Now if I go to 4096, 1, 2, still about 2 seconds. If I go bigger, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's what it should take a really long time.
Print key and find out what the number is?
You can. There's a way to see it, I forget. It'll come up later. But there's, that generates it, and there is a way to see it. It'll just look like random base 64 stuff.
The prime itself, it generates a key based on the prime.
Right, it's the product of 2 primes, so it's going to look just like a random number. Yeah, let me find out. I might as well look that up. That should be easy enough to do. So Python 3.
So RSA keeps a repository of large prime numbers somewhere.
No, it has to generate fresh random primes every time.
How does it do that?
It guesses numbers. We'll do it actually in the projects. You guess a number and then you do a test to see if it's prime. And then you guess again until it passes that test. And we'll see there's some simple tests that have been known for a long time that have a high probability of telling you if it's prime.
Sieve of Aristophanes, you test all primes up to the square root of the number.
That's not what you do. That would take forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you do is just guess the number. The fact is primes are not that rare. Why is it limited to prime numbers only? Oh, the math for RSA will only work if they're prime numbers. Because, and this is a very good question, and we'll do this a lot. We're going to have a lot more about RSA later, but let's get, here's RSA. The problem, here's what happens. Your n is the product of 2 prime numbers. And what you're going to do is you're going to encrypt stuff by taking the message to the E mod n. And there must be another number which will undo that, d. So that d times E is 1 mod n. Yeah. And that is only possible if n is the product of just 2 primes. If it would be the product of more primes, it would not work. And you'll see, there'll be a whole chapter coming up on this. This is why it has to be primes. If you used a n that was the product of more than 2 primes, none of this would work.
that
You would not. You would just scramble data, and there'd be no way to unscramble it.
Is that a result of Fermat's little theorem?
It's part of it. It's in there. Yeah. It's related, but I'm not sure exactly how it fits in. But we will definitely come across it. These are good questions, and you may notice I give you pretty miserable answers because this ain't much of a math course. So my students are afraid of the math, but you'll notice there isn't much math. This is really engineering. My only real interest is that we learn how to use it and have enough understanding of how it works to use it, but not really to prove it or anything, which would be fine, but I'm not doing the math, as you can see. Anyway, all right, so the only thing here is to see that the RSA key generation takes a long time, and we'll look at the keys later. Anyway, so now you've got to protect the key somehow. So what they often do, you'll store the key on your hard drive. Then you use it to like decrypt messages, but what if you get malware and people steal the key off your hard drive? So typically you password protect the key on your hard drive. And that's what key wrapping is. It's encrypted with a second key generated from a password. So just like your cell phone, even if somebody steals it, they can't get in because they don't have the password. That's the ID. That's the idea. And you could also store your key on a hardware token, like a smart card or USB dongle. But again, you'd probably password protect it.
I've never used passwords with Google or any other social media site. Is that essentially what they do, key wrapping?
No, you mean to log in with another site like I did? Right, yeah. No, what that uses is OAuth. What it does, when I go to Kahoot and I say log in with Google, what it does is Google has an API and it says, okay, someone wants to log in with you. Sends me to Google. Google takes my password and it sends back to Kahoot just a little bit of data about me, like my name. And now they say, okay, Google says you're this guy. I'll put this name up there and believe you're that guy. But I don't have to handle the password or store it anywhere. I just leave that to Google. And that's OAuth is a way to send a ticket, an encrypted ticket to Google, which then replies with an encrypted piece of data.
Authentication, it's not an encryption.
It's it uses encryption and it's signed, but it is yes, it's authentication. That's right. This is the way to outsource your authentication. Just like a lot of people outsource the payment. Like I don't want to handle credit card numbers, so I send you to some other site like PayPal. They handle the credit card numbers. I don't have to touch them. Therefore, I don't have to worry about the security risk of holding credit card numbers. And this way, I don't have to worry about the security risk of holding passwords. I just trust Google or Facebook to do that.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty good plan for smaller companies. All right. So things can go wrong. For example, you can have a bad proof. There was a proof. There's a system we'll talk about later called OAEP to handle padding in RSA, and it turned out to be incorrect. And the actual implementation turned out not to have a flaw. The actual flaw, the mathematical flaw did not matter the way it was actually used, but in principle, it was wrong. And here's a big one that has huge political implications. Around the 1990s, the US government decided that we did not want our enemies having strong encryption. The NSA wanted to be able to open all enemy traffic, so they thought exporting like RSA encryption would be unsafe. So they limited export of cryptography in the United States. You may remember around this time, if you tried to send a Windows XP machine with a Pentium 4, that was considered military hardware, and you could not send it to China and other nations because you could do powerful encryption on it. So they invented something called N, Windows version N, which had weakened encryption. And they exported it to all our unfriendly nations, used this deliberately weak encryption systems that the NSA could break, and that poisoned the internet with a bunch of servers that are serving data with those weak keys still decades later. And therefore, a bunch of encryption out there is deliberately weak and easy to crack, and there's a key downgrade attack. You can log into a server and you can lie and say, oh, I'm using a Windows XP N version. You have to lower your encryption to the low encryption, and most servers will do it because they wouldn't be able to serve customers in those countries in the 1990s. So now you've created a gaping hole in security, and this is why the whole cryptographic community is always very, very angry at the NSA for constantly poisoning our cryptography and making it weak and endangering us all so they can spy on the criminals and the terrorists. And of course, both sides have pretty good arguments for doing what they're doing, but the end result is you have the crypto wars where the privacy and security people are on one side and the government spies are on the other side. Yep, that's right. They didn't think about it. What the government always tries to do is they try to achieve this thing they call no bus, nobody but us. They want a weakness in the system that only they can exploit. And they try to do that, and that turned out to be a very difficult or impossible mathematical thing to do. All their attempts to do that have led to holes that other people can exploit. It's kind of like the way they made all this malware to take over people's machines, and then the Russians stole it and leaked it, and it turned into the WannaCry attack that made a huge computer security disaster. It's, this is a very common repeating problem, that our government makes dangerous weapons and then loses control of them, and then they cause disasters. You know,
Yeah, somehow they end up in Mar-a-Lago.
yeah, that's right. They end up in Mar-a-Lago or the wrong hands or something. That's the problem. I mean, the NSA, and that's the thing about Snowden was such a big deal, because everything about the NSA is based on them keeping secrets and not leaking them. And then Snowden just leaks everything, and they're like, wait a minute. If you guys can't keep secrets, then our whole structure is shot. And obviously...
Or use CIA password.
CIA what?
CIA password.
CIA passwords? What about it?
They got leaked.
They got leaked. I didn't know that. CIA's password.
It was like 1, 2, 3, ABC.
Oh man, yeah. Well, that's the thing. You trust those guys to protect the secrets, and as we can see, that isn't as great as it ought to be.
Oh, better than default password.
Well, yeah, but you know. Now what's going on here? I hit start and nothing happens. There we go. Okay. Anyway, was Snowden an inside job? Well, as far as I know, I've never heard people say other people helped him. He did hack into other people's accounts. But as far as I know, nobody else was convicted of anything with Snowden. So I don't think anybody inside was working with him, at least as far as I've heard. But we never got the whole story. It looks like we never will get the whole story, because Snowden seems like he's going to do what his lawyer said and just stay in Russia. That's what his lawyer said, just stay in Russia. I don't ever want to try to defend you. Yeah, it does make a good story. Yes, the U.S. government and the military do a lot of heinous things, absolutely. In a way, that's kind of their job, but often they're just doing awful things they shouldn't be doing. Personally believe Snowden worked with the team, but he was the one that stood up for it. Well, that certainly could be true. I haven't seen any evidence for it, but it certainly could be true. It's all based on secrecy and hiding. Who knows? All right, well, let's try these. Hopefully I haven't made a mistake on these. A lot of people love Snowden. Anyway, so...
If I was on this jury, I'd vote to acquit.
Yeah. All right, so what property means that experts have failed to crack it? That's heuristic security. Just means that nobody has figured out how to get in yet. All right, so which number has to be a secret? Yep, P is the prime number. P and Q are the prime numbers. Those have to be secret. N is the public key that is not a secret, the product of those two. All right, what operation converts a password into a key? All right, that's a key derivation function. And it's basically the same thing as password hashing functions, and we'll talk about more later and use them. All right. And what operation protects a key with a password? That's key wrapping. Good. All right. All right. So. They're going to have to tell me who they are if they want points. Stu, I know who that is. And Pete, I know who that is. All right, good. A lot of students using funny names and not telling me who they are this semester. I guess there are people that don't care about the points. Anyway, I'm going to stop this video and